And welcome to another Round the Rotary podcast with me, your host, J.P. Warren, and I'm very excited about today's podcast. It's a little off the topic than what we actually, it's not really off the topic, seeing how that Round the Rotary has kind of become a little, it's grown its own bourbon, people contributing when guests come on, which is never asked, but is always greatly appreciated. We're actually recording this in High, Texas, at the Garrison Brothers distillery and ranch, right?
Yes,
Is that what it's called? So before we begin, I got to say that Round the Rotary podcast is brought to you by Capital Petroleum Consultants, CPC, specialized in project engineering and well site supervision in all disciplines of the oil and gas industry. Contact us through www.capitalpetroleumconsultants.com to see what CPC can do for you today. And everyone, first off, I want to thank Garrison Brothers and the entire team here. We've been up here for about 3 hours now. I don't even know that. And we have Emma Kahn, who is a Bourbon Crusader, joining us today on Round the Rotary, who actually, many that don't know, that she also is a fellow Westport Tyrian, where I grew up in Connecticut. So it's just through a small world. She came down here and started kind of getting into, actually I'm going to let her kind of dive us in that. But anyway, this is a special bourbon episode because we're doing this in the office at the Garrison Brothers distillery in High, Texas. And it's such a cool spot. So we're recording this. We got some bourbon right here that we're going to discuss, we're going to get into. But Emma, kick us off. Tell us where you're from and kind of what brought you to where you're at today.
Yeah, so like we said, my name is Emma Kahn. My current title with Garrison Brothers is the Bourbon Crusader. I've had many over the years.
Did you pick that title?
I did not. I picked my last ones. My last title was the Barrel Baroness, which I chose, which is my Instagram handle if you want to follow me.
Okay. We will.
Which has been super fun. That was my favorite one. But when I'll get into this when we get there, but I transitioned into a new role last year and they made me change it.
When last year?
January.
So right before.
Right as COVID hit.
Right before COVID. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, like you said, I grew up in Westport.
Go Wreckers.
Go Wreckers. My dad still lives up there. He lives right by the beach.
Okay.
So,
yeah, my family's still up in Milford right now, right? A little down the road.
Yeah.
That's right, yeah.
Milford is much more chill.
It's a lot more chill than Westport.
A lot more chill than Westport.
It is. But anyway, so it's a real small world. Westport's a small town up in Connecticut, and it's just random that you are here working here, and we grew up in the same town several years apart, but it's still, you don't meet anyone from Westport down here.
No, you don't, and I'm kind of usually glad about that. I mean, you're an exception, 100%. You're an exception, but most of the time, I'm like, every time I see a Connecticut license plate down here, and I'm like, get out of my Texas.
Don't bring your politics to my state. Yeah, okay. All right.
No, but, so, I mean, after I graduated in 2015 from Staples, I went to college in a small liberal arts school in Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
And called the College of Worcester. It's in the northeast corner.
Everyone knows the College of Worcester.
Yeah, no.
Everyone's familiar with it.
No, it's like 2,000 people. The entire campus is a mile long.
Okay.
And it is just one of the top premier research colleges out there. So I had to write a thesis to graduate, which is just wild.
And we have can you explain who else is in the room with us today?
Yeah, so my dog Percy is with us, and he's being a little jerk.
Percy
you can hear him crying.
Percy is the Garrison Brothers ranch dog. If you ever see his little corgi mix running around, make sure you throw the ball and pet this puppy because it is a sweet, sweet guard dog.
Yes, he's a pain in the butt, ultimately. But he wants to go outside, but we can't let him outside. So no, too many cars. Okay. All right, so safety first here, Garrison. Yes,
Brothers.
We don't want any flattened doggies.
Okay.
But while I was in college, I had the opportunity to go to Scotland, where I actually finished my degree, which I have a degree in philosophy and religious studies from the College of Worcester. And my junior year, I went over to Edinburgh. Okay. And I took.
So why did you choose Edinburgh? Was it was one of those things like I just want to go study abroad or something like that?
Yeah, I knew I wanted to go abroad, and. I knew this may sound shallow, but I definitely wanted to go somewhere that spoke English. Just so I could really.
I don't think that's shallow, but okay.
Thank you. I really wanted to immerse myself in the culture and have fun. And the University of Edinburgh actually has one of the best schools in the world for general religious studies.
So this had nothing to do with
bourbon.
Whiskey or anything like that?
I fell in love with whiskey when I went over there.
Tell us that.
Before that, my experience was college, which we don't need to
go into. It's like Popov, like whiskey. I get it. Yeah.
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 Like it's trash can jungle juice. Yeah.
It's college whiskey.
Yeah. So I went over there and I spent about 9 months there. I spent a good portion of the summer before I started university just traveling as much as I could.
Okay.
And the way I traveled was through bus tours, which is the only thing I could afford, and it ended up being one of the best decisions that I have ever made because not only do you not have to drive, but the tour guides over there are so knowledgeable. They have all of these degrees about history and like folklore and everything like that, and they're just really a true wealth of knowledge. And you're almost guaranteed to stop at least one distillery at every tour you go on.
Okay.
So my first one I went on, I was actually with my mother. She was visiting with me before I started university, and we did a 5-day trip up through the Highlands and into the Isle of Skye.
Okay.
And that was on our first day. We stopped at Glengoyne Distillery, and it was stunning.
Beautiful.
So beautiful. You had the rolling hills. There are sheep everywhere. Like this, everything is so old.
The distillery is older than like the United States.
Exactly. There's like the tradition and the just passed down from generation to generation. And I'm taking all this in, and I'm like 22. No, I was not 22. I was 20.
Okay.
So I couldn't even drink yet, like in the United States.
Okay, in the States.
Like in the States. I was good over there. But we did the tour, and I'm like, this is great. This product's going to be amazing. I'm going to love it. I'm going to be that person that loves Scotch. And they brought us into this big barn that had all these tables, like long tables in there. And they set down your little Glencairn glass with your eyedropper of water, which all Scotch distilleries do.
It opens it up.
Mm-hmm, yep. Exactly. I took my first sip and hated it.
Okay.
Absolutely hated it.
Okay.
It tasted like burning rubber and like just dirt.
Okay.
And it's not a peated.
Those are very complex flavors you're discussing.
Yeah.
Burning rubber, dirt, trash.
Yeah. It's not a peated Scotch. Glengoyne Distillery is a Highland distillery, so they don't use the peat, so it's not smoky. It's just tasted like that, which it doesn't taste like that to me now. But that being the first sip of like actual real like whiskey I'd ever had, I was like, oh my goodness, why am I like this? What is wrong with me that it tastes like this? It's because it's made in such this beautiful place and has all this culture, and I'm like, how is this happening? Luckily, I had a tour guide that took pity on me and could see that I was really frustrated because I wanted to like all this stuff. So finally, we were sitting in the oldest pub in the Isle of Skye after a couple days of visiting all these distilleries. He sat me down. He goes, I'm going to teach you how to drink Scotch the Scottish way. So he started me off on Drambuie, which is a whiskey liqueur.
Okay.
Scotch liqueur. And then we slowly moved into Rusty Nails, which are half Drambuie, half Scotch. Okay. And then by the end of the night, I was drinking just like regular, just Scotch on its own.
Pretty much anything tastes good at that point in time.
Yeah. You lose all like function of your legs.
What is the Scotch way?
Scottish
way, I'm sorry.
It takes forever. It takes absolutely forever, which is really frustrating because as I started meeting people in Scotland, including this tour guide that was teaching me this, they would tell me stories, the folklore, and stories of the area, which Scotland just has a really wonderful folklore. If you've never, I've done a lot of extra research into and read all these stories of fairies and wee people and princesses and dragons and all clans fighting and all this stuff. So they'd be in the middle of telling me the story. This princess is about to be abducted by their rival clan, and they would stop and take a sip of their Scotch, and then they hold it in their mouth for 10 seconds, which is a long time in silence, and I'm just standing there
So that makes you want to get what happened.
What happened?
Where's the princess at?
But they're savoring their Scotch, so that's the Scottish way.
So it's one of those things you take it, you put it in your mouth at the most crucial point of the story, and you let the audience wait a little bit. That's good storytelling, though.
Yeah,
and
excellent storytellers. Amazing storytellers, and it's even better when I was in the middle of the Isle of Skye, and I've already heard all this folklore of dragons coming down. That's why there's this huge pit in this mountain. And
naturally,
now they're telling me all this more this truly, the Isle of Skye makes you believe in magic.
It's just as beautiful. It's picturesque.
It's so beautiful. So yeah, that's where I fell in love with it.
So did you fall in love with it there after hearing the folklore and kind of seeing the
folklore,
process?
I'm surrounded by gorgeous men in kilts playing the bagpipes, and I mean, once you have an experience like that, it's really hard not to devote your life to it.
I mean, you're laughing about it, but it kind of is. Like if you're around, like whether you're in Ireland, whether you're in Scotland, or something like that, or honestly, even watching a soccer game or a football game in like England, like when you're around that culture, that environment, just the energy from that room, you know what I mean? Like you're like, okay, I want to get into this. So it does kind of bring a sense of like, this is how it's done. You kind of like, and that stays with you a little bit. It does.
Yeah, it really does.
So you fell in love with it there.
Fell in love with it over there. I came back.
Graduated.
Yep, came back, graduated, wrote my thesis, graduated, all that good stuff, and then once I was kind of like figuring out what I wanted to do with my very useful philosophy and religious studies degree.
A lot of philosophy factories opening up.
Yes, of course. And which I truly believe is like people with philosophy, more people need to study philosophy.
I love philosophy. Alan Watts, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know Alan Watts?
I've read a little bit of him.
I mean, I listened to his lectures. I just downloaded one of his books. I have one of his books at the house. He teaches the Zen Taoist way of to like the Western. Anyway, I agree. Philosophy is just a unique way to reframe certain things in your world.
And I mean, it teaches you how to think, which is honestly something that is lost.
Oh, I agree.
In people these days.
Well, these days, the people think they're told what to think through social media.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Through the news. Like, oh, this is happening, and this should really piss you off. It's like, why? Mm-hmm. Like, it shouldn't piss me off. Let me think about that a little bit. So I completely agree. People need to think and not voice their opinion, especially if they don't know what they're disagreeing with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amen to that.
But after college, I ended up being recruited by this organization called City Year, which is run through AmeriCorps, which is a government-funded program that also does like Teach for America and the Peace Corps and all that good stuff, where they take young people between the ages of 18 and I believe 23, and they put them into low-income school systems to act as a extra classroom help, where you're a near-peer mentor and tutor to kids.
Okay.
I was recruited by them. I was a coach in college, and I was a peer mentor, and did all this other stuff. So they were like, pick a place you want to go, and like,
it's yours.
Off you go. Okay. Yeah. And which was way better sounding than moving back to Westport and trying to get a job in New York City.
Oh yeah. And then waking up at 4 a.m. doing the commute and getting home when everyone's
my goodness.
I know. My dad did that.
Yeah. Which, good for him.
Yeah, sure.
Because it's awful.
it ain't my game. This is my game right now. Having a podcast with you and having some bourbon. That's my game right now. So you chose Texas.
I chose Texas, and they were like, okay, so San Antonio has been rocking and rolling. San Antonio was one of the first sites of City Year, and they happened to be just opening up a new site in Dallas. It was their first year ever going into the schools, and they were like, we need some strong people to go there. Would you be interested? And I was like, I've never been to Texas before. At that time, I was like, this is just going to be a year of my life. I might as well go somewhere.
Get the experience.
Yeah, go somewhere new. So I picked up and moved to Dallas.
But you already had that sense of taking yourself out of your comfort zone and placing yourself in foreign environments, because Texas is its own country.
It really is. I think I had more I definitely had more culture shock moving here than I did.
Edinburgh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. Okay. Especially Dallas wasn't bad, but when I moved out to Hill Country, it was like, whoa.
Different culture.
Yeah.
So.
But I ended up getting a part-time job at a distillery in Dallas while I was doing City Year.
What led you to get this part-time job at a distillery? Was it your love for Scotch from Edinburgh, or was it just like, hey, I need some extra cash?
A little of both. Okay. They only paid me $450 every 2 weeks to do City Year, which is not enough to live in DFW.
Right.
So I was like, I need a part-time job. What would be something that's fun that I can do on the weekends? So I just Googled distilleries in Dallas, and a couple popped up.
Okay.
And one happened to be hiring, and it was... at that point, they were called Witherspoon.
Okay.
They're in North Dallas, in a little town called Louisville.
Was it bourbon? Was it vodka? Because there's been a huge Texas vodka push as well.
Yeah, there has been with the rise of Tito's and all that good stuff. But they made bourbon, single malt, and rum.
Okay.
So
you're not familiar with bourbon yet. You know the Scotch.
I knew Scotch. I was super familiar with that. I knew a little bit about bourbon just from like being interested.
Okay.
But I got a job selling shirts and bottles there on the weekends. And then I really fell in love with the industry. Like once I had my feet in, I just dove right in, started doing all this research, and then I started talking too much. So they made me a tour guide.
Okay.
And then once I finished my year of service, they hired me full time as their tour director.
Okay.
So I ran their tour program for about a year.
So you got out of the school program.
I did my year of service. I did my year of, they just asked for a year.
That's what it is, the year of service. Okay.
Yeah,
okay,
the year of service. You can do 2, but I was like, it was a lot for me. I was in a 7th grade writing classroom in South Dallas, which is a very rough neighborhood.
Okay.
So, and I still keep in contact with a few of my students, and they're like, Miss Emma, did we drive you to drink? And I'm like, a little bit. But yeah, once I finished my year of service, I started working with them full time. I left them after about a year and a half and started working with a brewery called Noble Ray, which was so much fun. That's where I really fell in love with fermentation.
Okay.
Noble Ray did all these crazy experimental beers of like rhubarb sours, like golden sours made with champagne yeast, like peanut butter and jelly.
So it was just all over the board, creative.
It was so much fun,
yeah.
And I had a blast working for them. And my mother moved to Austin in 2017.
Okay.
And she called me up one day and she's like, hey, why don't you drive on out and we'll do like a hill country weekend. And I said, sure, like that would be super fun. One condition, can we please go to Garrison Brothers?
Why?
Garrison Brothers is just a powerhouse
what
in the industry.
Year is this?
This is 2017.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Garrison Brothers is just a powerhouse in the bourbon industry.
Okay.
We're the first legal bourbon distillery in Texas. First legal bourbon distillery.
Let's talk about you.
I know.
We're gonna get into plugging Garrison a little bit, but I like it. You're trying to bring it in first. So anyway, let's go to Garrison Brothers.
Yeah, I wanted to go to Garrison Brothers, and she was like, fine by me. She's a whiskey lover as well.
Okay.
So we came out here. We're doing the tour. It was an absolute beautiful day in September. And our
same scenery. Has the same scenery, or have they built a couple more things around here?
Nope, same scenery.
Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm. Exactly the same as what you saw today. And my mom was a little too passionate about her quality control of the bourbon, and we took our tour. Which at that point there were only 9 people working on the ranch. So our tour guide was our hospitality director. Her name was Caitlin. And Caitlin was going on, and I'm just in complete awe of this establishment, coming from like the small distillery I was at to such a larger operation where everything is just done by hand with the highest quality of everything. I'm like, I got to be a part of this.
So you came into this actually knowing a little bit about this, and next thing you know, you're exposed to the processes here at Garrison Brothers, and you're like, holy shit, this is
next level.
This is the Yankees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's a sports reference. I don't do sports, but it's a sports reference.
I'm a big Yankees fan. So.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, at that point, I had been running this tour program for this other distillery for over a year and a half. So I was already very familiar with
the process.
I knew the process and everything like that. So, but coming and seeing it done this way was just, it blew my mind.
Another level.
And my mom, speaking cursive in our bottling room, she's asking, like, how is it possible that all of you, like, there's only 9 people working here, and you guys are becoming so popular. How are you pulling this off?
Yeah.
And Caitlin is like, I'm actually looking to hire someone else in hospitality to help us out. So I whipped around. I stuck my hand out, introduced myself. I sent her my resume that evening. I had a phone interview with Dan Garrison, our owner, that Friday. This was Saturday. It was Saturday. Had a phone interview with Dan that next Friday. Came back out to the property the following Friday, and they hired me on the spot with the condition that I wouldn't tell anyone that Dan hired a Yankee.
Oh, okay.
Which is just, it's too late.
Well, now we're on the podcast. You've heard it here first. Around the Rotary. Someone's from Connecticut.
Yeah. So I started off as a tour guide with Garrison Brothers.
And what year was this?
This was 2017.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I was the 10th employee. I was the 12th employee overall in Garrison Brothers, 10th on the ranch.
That is so mind-blowing that there's first off, you took us, my wife and I, on this awesome tour. I don't know how long it was. I think it was 2.5 hours. And everyone we bumped into was so friendly, down to earth. It seems like more like of a family here.
Yeah.
And it's just like, you feel that when you're here. You feel everyone jive. You feel everyone kind of work together as a family, which is awesome. Yeah. But it's just like, it's mind-boggling. Hey, Pierce is okay. Puppy's all right. So you keep doing it. Let's get him a mic. So so it's like, it's shocking that there's only 9 or 12 people at that time that are just running this type of operation. Company. Yeah.
I mean, now it's...
That was 15?
65 people.
That much growth?
Working for Garrison Brothers.
Okay, well, let's get into the growth after this. So anyway,
I started as a tour guide, and then in 2018, we quadrupled production. We went into 24 hours, so we added a night shift. And we also added a whole mess of equipment to increase our production.
So was that driven off of what they were seeing on demand, or was that just one of those things where it's like, hey, bourbon's taking off, let's get in on this? Or
it was a little of both.
Okay.
It was a little of both. Garrison Brothers was definitely starting to get a lot of traction and becoming a known brand. Yeah. At that point, people were kind of like, what's going on in Texas? And now people are like, what is Texas? Like, but at that point, they were preparing. And at the time, I was living in a tin single wide on a 12-acre cattle ranch off the side of the highway with my annoying little dog, Percy. And there's not that much to do out here except winery, hop, and drink bourbon.
Right.
So in the evenings...
Which is why I love it here.
Yeah, it's wonderful during the day. In the evenings, you're like, I don't know what to do with myself. So I would just hang out with a night crew. Our other female distiller, Samantha Olvera, was one of our leading night shift people. Okay. Her and J.D. Anderson, who you guys met. Yep. And I would hang out with Sam, and you also met Cody. And I'd ask so many questions. I wanted to learn how to distill really badly. And Sam was really good about answering my questions, but then Cody was like, I'll just show you so that next time you can just do it for me.
Yeah, it'll make his job a little bit easier.
Yeah, so...
You know what's interesting about that, though, and again, I'm going to tie this back into oil and gas real quick around the Rotary podcast. It's interesting because, like, so often when there's downtime, I mean, for example, COVID, no one's really getting out. No one's really... They're not drilling wells, they're not completing wells or anything like that, but it's interesting that taking the initiative, and again, it's not just our industry, it sounds like it's every industry, taking the initiative. It's like, I don't have a lot going on. I'm going to go see if I can learn something or help out this other person that is doing something I completely don't even understand. So it's taking that initiative and that step to say, hey, what's going on? What are you doing here? Like, teach me about this. And you find that through so many different people's career and paths that was one of the things that like pushed them to where they're at today. Yeah.
People ask me all the time, like, how do I get involved in the spirits industry? How do I get involved in the alcohol industry, especially on the brewery and distillery level? And I'm like, go volunteer your time.
Yeah.
And people are like, what? You want me to go give my time for free and like just clean up? And I'm like, yes, that is how you learn, and you can prove to the company, like, hey, I love your product. I'm devoted. Like, I want to learn more. Yeah. Like, and then when time comes, when they need extra hands, they're going to ask you first.
Yeah.
So that's what happened to me in production. When we expanded and needed more production operators, I went up to our master distiller, Donis Todd, and was like, would you consider me for a full-time production operator? And he was like, absolutely. You're already trained. I don't have to run an ad in the paper. Like, you're hired. When do you want to start?
Okay.
So I moved from down the hill in hospitality to up the hill.
So for those of you that don't know, real quick, so there's definitely a down the hill gathering. That's where you have your shops, your gift shop, and you have this beautiful scene where you can just kind of sit around and sip on bourbon or beer or water, whatever you feel like. And then up the hill, that's where the operations are. That's when you have the
Yep, it's about a quarter mile up the hill.
Quarter mile up the hill, and that's kind of where the operations are. So you took yourself out from, I guess, the day-to-day down here and put yourself into the operations. Okay, cool.
Yep.
All right.
So for 2.5 years, I loved it. I had an absolute blast. I ran
What about it did you love?
I just loved having my hands on the bourbon.
Okay.
I ended up having my history in beer. I fell in love with our fermentation room and ended up just really claiming it as my own. Okay. And I ended up doing a lot of research for the company, and especially with when we added our 2,000-gallon fermentations, they are just wild. They have minds of their own. They're like toddlers. The second you like take your eyes off of them, like they're off and running.
Okay.
I ended up doing a lot of research for the company with that. Met with some engineers, which was super fun. And I learned how to distill. Russell taught me how to distill, who you guys met. He was the butcher for 20 years. Oh, yeah. He's the super tall cowboy.
Yeah. He knows how deep the water well is.
Yes, he knows how deep.
9,980 feet.
Yep. I learned how to distill, but I really just fell in love with fermentation. And so I did that for a while. And then the company ran into this problem where the average bourbon consumer is just so much more knowledgeable about the product than they used to be.
Because it became a passion and a hobby for a lot of people.
Exactly.
That's kind of what got me kicked off as Tyler Schultz. I mean, the guy that I showed you that built the bourbon shelf.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's kind of started me out, and it does become a passion. It becomes a kind of like a little subculture hobby. I mean, you have trading groups. You have people want to know. Yeah.
And they have great technical questions, and
except for the rainwater question.
Except for the time somebody asked me where our rainwater comes from.
Right.
That guy.
Yeah. So we're doing a tour, and my wife wanted to ask a question. I said, "Babe, there's no stupid questions." And I was like, "Well, actually, there might be one." Somebody asked where the rainwater comes from. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yep. So you're falling in love with it. Yep. You're learning about this. You're meeting with engineers. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the company was like, "Hey, we need another person with that is able to go into the market and have these technical conversations with these people that are just wild about our product, and they wanted to know if I would be interested in something like that." And the plan was for me to travel all over the country, eventually travel to Europe, and start spreading the gospel of Texas bourbon. And
wow.
I started the job in January of 2020.
What happened?
What happened?
Here we are. Here comes the one of your mentors in here that taught you everything you know.
The world stopped turning. With COVID.
So what did you do? So you get into this new job in January, and your job is to travel, spread the word, spread the gospel to Garrison Brothers. Next thing you know, the world's on lockdown. So what happened with that with Garrison Brothers?
So I was incredibly lucky. Garrison Brothers chose to keep their people over money. So they actually stopped production and to retain their entire staff. So
to highlight the importance of that is for bourbon, it's all about aging. It's the aging process. So and obviously this bourbon boom that's going on right now, you lose production, then you're not getting those barrels aged. So you just there's nothing you can do besides wait, right? Yeah. So the fact of making the decision to retain the employees and stop production, that's to me that's huge.
Yeah,
I mean, that speaks volumes about who you're.
I mean, with. Garrison Brothers is one of those companies that they put their people first. I mean, like Dan, of course.
All right.
Dan and his wife Nancy, like they know my entire family. They know what's going on in my personal life, and they're really invested in it, and they truly, truly care. So it was a very easy decision for them.
And tell me about that. I mean, that decision was easy for them, but for a lot of people, I mean, you're running a company. The decision to shut down operations, and in the bourbon industry, you shut it down. Tell me about the potential, I guess, downfall or what are the not results, but what are the consequences of shutting down?
So we shut down for a couple months.
Okay.
So that means in 4 or 5 years, we don't have product. So we have to figure out how we're going to ultimately bridge this gap, which we will absolutely do.
Right.
But when you have it's a problem for tomorrow. But I mean, in the whiskey industry in general, you have to think on your timeline that you're thinking ahead. In Texas, we only have to think 4 years ahead because our bourbon matures faster than other parts of the world.
Because the weather, the Texas weather.
Exactly.
God, I don't want to get into so much of it. So keep going, then let's go to Garrison.
As opposed to in Kentucky where you have to think 10, 12 years ahead, or in Scotland you're thinking 20 years ahead. So that's your timeline. So we're lucky that we only have to think about 4 years ahead, but it'll be interesting. I mean, we're going to make it work. We're going to as soon as we could, we immediately started making product again, and it's going to be great.
I'm so excited to kind of see that dip in Garrison Brothers. And next thing you know, people will be collecting and this. And that's going to I feel like that's going to be a cool part of y'all's history.
Yeah.
That being said, let's get into Garrison Brothers.
Yeah.
Tell me about Garrison Brothers and the history behind Texas Bourbon, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So Garrison Brothers is the first legal bourbon distillery in Texas. We're also the first legal bourbon distillery outside of Kentucky and Tennessee since the end of Prohibition.
So let's talk about this. Prohibition ended when?
1933.
And so this is the first Texas bourbon distillery legal in Texas. And when did Garrison Brothers open up?
So we distilled our first legal batch in December of 2006.
So that's an insane amount of time between, I guess, when it was Prohibition stopped, to where we're at now. Why did no one else have the idea to open up a bourbon distillery in Texas?
Because to this day, people still believe that you can only make bourbon in Kentucky.
So is that just kind of like a rumor or like a hard belief, like a personal truth? Like, oh no, it's true.
Yep.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And you're seeing that being very wrong right now. So tell me, walk me through this.
Yeah. So I actually used to keep the TTB report open on my phone when I was doing tours, because you get so much pushback from people like, you can't call your product bourbon. Like, you can't do this because it has to come from Kentucky. And I'd be like, and then you explain, like, Kentucky bourbon can only come from Kentucky. And we wouldn't be here without the people in Kentucky. We are extremely grateful for our resources and our people that have mentored us to be the distillery that we are today. But
can you get into that? Can you talk to me about what was the gentleman's name? Dan, who went up there. Tell me about how Garrison Brothers got kicked off and how it started. Yeah. That's such a cool story on who he trained under and who he worked with.
So Dan Garrison's story with bourbon starts in the late 90s. Right. He was working for a marketing company, and he was watching the rise of this thing called the internet. And I know it's this wild thing. And he's watching all these young people make more money than him, and he's like, I want in. Yeah. So he left his job and started working with another company where he was in charge of all of their marketing, and they would do all these digital projects, building trading platforms and all this fun stuff. And the company was wildly successful. And they were bought out by another company in California, which was super exciting for Dan. He had acquired all these stock shares, and he was ready to ride off into the sunset with his wife and kids.
Dream too. That's everyone's dream to sell. You're like, oh yeah, it's coming. Yeah.
So typical when a business sells, you have a clause that says you have to wait a certain amount of time to cash all of your shares, which is that's just what happens. So Dan only had to wait about 6 months, which is not a long time.
Not a long time.
So he's like, what could happen in 6 months? So him and his wife Nancy are planning what boat they're gonna buy, what Ivy League schools their kids are gonna go to. They were planning their ranch in Fredericksburg and all this good stuff. And then in 2001, this little company in Houston called Enron collapsed.
The mom and pop shop, yes, I remember that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Dan's company wrote the entire trading platform for Enron. So when they were exposed, Dan's company went down in a fiery blaze of glory, and Dan found himself owing the IRS hundreds of thousands of dollars. Okay. So he went to the government, and he's like, this is what I can give you, take it or you won't get anything. And they took it. They forgave the rest of his debt, and he did what any responsible husband and parent of 2 toddlers would do, and he went and got drunk on the Kentucky Bourbon Trail.
Sounds like a lot of my buddies. Yeah.
His trip was only supposed to last a week, but it ended up lasting an entire month. Okay. On Dan's first day there, he walked into Maker's Mark, and Dan is one of those people where you meet him, he's just like a tour de force. Like, he takes over the entire room. He's extremely charismatic, and
he's just got that presence and energy that people like. Man, I want to talk to this guy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, and he'll tell you that when he tells the story, he's like, a choir of angels followed me into this distillery, and he realized his true calling. So, during his month-long stint, and for many more visits to come, not only did Dan befriend the master distiller at Maker's Mark, but also Elmer Thiele over at Buffalo Trace. Oh. And these men not only taught Dan how to make bourbon, but ultimately gave him their blessings to come back to Texas and start a bourbon distillery of his own.
And one thing that I asked Emma, so I've heard all this, and I'd love hearing it again, but one thing that I asked Emma was like, hey, look, if he went there, learned all this stuff, learned how to distill and make bourbon and all stuff, and he didn't get the approval of these master distillers at Buffalo Trace and Maker's Mark, do you think he would have come back to Texas and kicked off Garrison?
I honestly don't. I don't think he would have, or would have taken. We wouldn't have been the first, right? Because Balcones was hot on our heels. Okay. When we were opening up, so we got our DSP before them, and then they came in a couple months later, and then they released the first Texas bourbon bottle to market. So there's a very friendly rivalry between the 2 distilleries, but it definitely pushed him to follow his dreams and to be meeting Elmer Thiele at his favorite steakhouse whenever he would go up to Kentucky, which was, Dan claims to be Applebee's.
And plus, if you get that type of blessing too, that's one of those things. Like, hey, I've worked with these. Like, they taught me everything. They're like, I kind of have to do this now. It's a responsibility that I have to do this. So when you come to Texas, people are like, oh, can you have bourbon, Texas? Tell us why not. Why is bourbon a give us that?
Yeah. So I mean, bourbon has just a plethora of rules that you have to abide by in order to call your product as such.
And so the Congress actually deemed bourbon as a U.S. product.
In 1964, President Lyndon Baines Johnson declared bourbon a national product.
Okay.
So what that means is that you can make bourbon anywhere in the United States as long as you are within what is classified as the 50 states.
Okay.
So until Texas secedes, again, we're good. But even if you follow the rest of the rules and you are in Japan, you cannot call your product bourbon because of that geographical location rule or element of it.
Okay. So
it's a completely protected American product, which is awesome. But
God bless the USA. So he's coming here. So when does he start this? Tell us about the land, the kind of history, everything. Let's talk about the process, and then let's talk about the taste.
So we own 70 acres that the distillery sits on itself in this little town in the hill country called Hye. That's spelled Hye. And then we actually, Dan and his wife Nancy, own another 200 across the street, which we are just waiting to see what they're going to do.
And that's but previously you said that's where the wheat was.
Yeah, we used to grow our wheat over there. Yeah. However, we quickly outgrew how much we could harvest.
Okay.
So it's kind of just chilling over there. We do a lot of hunting over there at the moment. Right. A lot of our guys have their hunting license, and they'll go and get whitetail, and that's what they eat for the entire year.
And someone makes really good
yes,
deer jerky.
Russell makes the best deer jerky.
So pretty much everything in this Garrison Brothers bottle, how much people say, oh, Texas whiskey, Texas bourbon, all this stuff, and sometimes it's not really the case. It's not really true Texas bourbon. Can you talk to me how this is a true Texas bourbon?
Yeah. So with the rise of Texas bourbon and its popularity and all these wonderful distilleries popping up, and people kind of being like, whoa, Texas, a lot of people wanted to jump on this bandwagon, and there's this trend in the industry, which is actually really, really common once you start to take the blindfold off, but they source their product. They source their product, which means they're buying it from another place, and then somebody wants to come in too. No. Anyway, I know, Percy. So sourcing is when you buy it from another place. A very common place that people buy it is a huge distillery out of Indiana called MGP.
Okay.
And you smack a label on there. You call it Texas Bourbon just because you bottled it here, and you kind of get to reap the benefits of being this oddity that is Texas whiskey.
And the whole process is not how it's done.
It is completely untrue.
Okay.
So Garrison Brothers is a true grain to glass Texas product. All of our grain comes from Texas. We do every step of the process, from the milling, cooking, fermenting, distilling, aging. It is all done on our property here. And it led Dan and a few other Texas distilleries that were kind of doing it the quote-unquote honest way to they found this organization called the Texas Whiskey Association.
Okay.
And you actually have a very strict set of rules that you have to kind of meet in order to be considered a certified Texas whiskey. And once you meet these requirements, meaning basically you are truly, truly making it here, you're aging it here, you can put this fancy little sticker or this little mark on your bottle that says certified Texas whiskey, and it is a immediate note to the consumer, like, this is a product that was actually made here.
So you get your corn from South Texas, you get your wheat here, everything here is sourced from Texas.
Yeah, so our mash bill across the board, all of our different bourbon expressions have the same mash bill, and then what kind of differentiates them is the aging process. We use 74% white corn, 15% wheat, and 11% barley.
Okay.
All of our grain is food grade and also organic and non-GMO.
Good.
So it's really the best grain that you can find. We at Garrison Brothers believe that if you're going to make an incredible product, it has to be amazing from the get-go, which for all types of whiskey means your grain.
You know what's cool? You know what's cool about this? Like, I'm looking for that stamp. Where's that stamp?
It's on the side of the bottle, on the single barrel bottle.
Okay, so if it's right here.
Yeah, and then on the small batch, it's like right on the front.
So pretty much for those that are out there looking for, obviously there's new bourbons coming in from Austin, for all that stuff. So in order to truly tell if it's actually a Texas whiskey, according by these guidelines and rules, there is a little stamp that kind of looks like a shield, and it says certified Texas whiskey. And what's cool about this, I was kind of looking at this where you're just talking, corn variety, food grade, #1 white, from farms in South Texas. So you can actually see where this the products came in to make this.
So if you find an older bottle of Garrison Brothers, the corn location will be different. Ooh. We used to partner with a really wonderful family-owned farm up in Dallam County, which is in the Panhandle, and we've just expanded so much in the past couple of years that the farm couldn't meet our orders anymore, which was really a shame. But we're very happy with the white corn that we're getting from South Texas.
Can you talk to me about, I guess, the brand Garrison Brothers? First off, what is the goal? What's the story behind it? Besides, going to learn all that stuff. Like, it's a Texas bourbon, right? Primarily Texas bourbon, and I see y'all are kind of started expanding out a little bit to try different casking methods with different barrels, with different stuff like that. Can you talk to me about, I guess, the different products Garrison Brothers offers, and just give me a little story about that.
So ultimately, Garrison Brothers is a brand. On the back of every single one of our bottles, it says, good bourbon can change the world. Okay. We believe that bourbon is, first and foremost, it's meant to be shared, bring people together, and create just amazing experiences and stories for people to share. So all you people that have a bottle at home that you're waiting to open, just open it and drink it, which drives me nuts, even though I do that too.
What, you just get a good bottle, you don't open it?
Yeah.
You're waiting for like a special occasion. Like, just open it. Like,
just open it and drink it. Like, the one bottle that I'm saving is a couple years ago, the company did a special single barrel for my dog.
Oh,
for
really?
Percy. And it has, so on the front of the single barrel bottle, you can see it has this custom label. So it said, hand selected by Jonas Todd and Percy, the distillery dog. And it was the first cast strength single barrel that we ever did. It was 127 proof. It yielded just over 40 bottles the first time. And I took his little paw and I dipped it in silver paint, and he's signed every bottle. So I haven't opened that one yet.
Open that.
Yeah.
That's kind of very sentimental, I feel like.
Super sentimental. Yeah. And they did it again. They did a second release as well, where they proofed it down to 94 because it was so popular. It sold out in less than 2 days. So they did it again the following year, and they proofed it down to 94. We had over 100 bottles. That one I've opened.
Okay.
But the first one,
I
can't bring myself to do it. But even though it's it's supposedly very good.
So right now, you and I are sipping on the Garrison Brothers small batch, which is the most popular one. That's the black wax.
Yes. So all of our releases are differentiated by what color the wax is. Okay. So our small batch is kind of like our base bourbon. It's what we make the most of. It's what we sells the most. And it's really just where our brand kind of starts. Okay. The term small batch isn't actually a term that's regulated. So there's no cap on how many barrels can actually go into a small batch. So ultimately what it is, it's a marriage of barrels that have been made at one distillery. Okay. So we've obviously made everything that's going in there, and we're taking a portion of our barrels and marrying them together to create this unique flavor profile. Okay. From there, we kind of move up to our single barrel, which is our single silver wax.
Silver wax, yes.
And the single barrel is just that. It is bourbon that comes from one unique barrel that we come across. So sometimes every barrel is different. Barrels are like snowflakes.
They're all unique.
They're all unique. They're all different. And just because you fill 2 barrels on the same day with the same juice that came from your distillation, even if they age next to each other, there is no promise that they'll come out tasting the same. Okay. So Donis he's like a living Rolodex of all of our barrels. He can tell you exactly, you just name a number and he'll tell you where it is. It's kind of wild. But as Donis is going through and tasting all of these barrels, he'll start to choose. Okay, I want this for our small batch. I want this for Baumaree. I want this for Honeydew. And then when you come across one where we're what happened here? This is wild. It gets kicked into our single barrel program so we can showcase how unique it is. So
each of these single barrels are going to taste different.
Mm-hmm.
I never knew that.
So it's infuriating and also wonderful. Some people find it infuriating because there's no consistency.
There's no consistency.
Yeah.
Exactly. If I'm buying a bottle, I want to know what relatively. But this, I mean, it's kind of a fun a fun experiment because you never know.
Yeah, and our single barrels usually fall into one of three categories. They're either really spicy and taste like we've used rye in it. They're really sweet. And have a really dominating flavor like maple or pecan pie or something like that, or it's in the I don't know what happened here.
It's just
but it's usually one of those three.
Okay.
But I mean, when you pick up a bottle, unless you found one from the same barrel, it's gonna be completely different.
So we started here, then here, and then so we started small batch and went to single barrel. So tell me about these other cool. You brought about 4 or 5.
Yeah.
That just sounds so exciting to try once you can find them. So tell me about them real quick, and tell us also what's your favorite.
So I guess I'll start with my favorite. My personal favorite is our Baumaree, which we get is spelled very oddly, and people it's named after Baumaree State Park, which is it's a big freshwater pool in West Texas.
Okay.
Dan and his brother Charlie learned how to swim there, and it is just a beautiful Texas landmark.
Okay.
And so we named it after that. It has bright blue wax for the water of Baumaree.
Okay.
And it is a double barrel bourbon.
Talk to me about that.
So
I didn't know about this until you told me. So tell the listeners out there, what does that mean, a double barrel bourbon?
Yeah, so we're using 2 barrels during this aging process. Well, so we age it in we age the bourbon in 1 brand new barrel for about 3 years, and then we dump the bourbon out. And then what's left, we put into another brand new barrel for an additional year or more.
Okay.
So barrels are like tea bags. When you use a new barrel that first time,
you have to use a new barrel for bourbon.
Yes, legally we have to use new barrels. When you use a new barrel, it's going to be extremely bold. So when you make a cup of tea, when you use those tea leaves the first time, you're going to get everything, every nuance, every small detail about that tea you're going to get into your little cup there. And it's the same with barrels. It is bold, it is in your face, it is sweet, it is spicy. You get everything. And you can absolutely use those tea leaves in that barrel again. However, when you do that, it's kind of just going to be an echo of what it was.
An echo, okay.
So you can pick up on those caramel and vanilla and chocolate and cherry notes and all that good stuff, but it's just not going to be as in your face as bourbon is characteristically known for. And it's funny because obviously the Scotch industry predominantly uses bourbon barrels now, which is a pretty new innovation in the scheme of time.
Yeah.
But it's funny because when you ask a distiller in Scotland, they're like, oh yeah, let the bourbon distillery take all that harshness out, and then we'll get what's left in those beautiful subtle tones. But
why is this your favorite, the double barrel?
So I love Baumaree. First and foremost, we do a lot of philanthropic efforts with it. So for every bottle we sell, $5 gets donated back to Texas Parks and Wildlife.
Okay.
Right after we released Baumaree the first time back in 2017, the pool actually collapsed. And it was just devastating to the Texas community because it's such a beautiful landmark that is held in such high regard in so many people's hearts. And it collapsed and shut down ultimately, and they didn't have the money to rebuild it. So we started doing all of these fundraising efforts in order to preserve it and build it back up. So we had all these pool parties across the state. We were holding all these dinners for Texas Parks and Wildlife, and we ended up raising over $65,000 and more to rebuild this park. And we had another company come and match everything that we raised. So we are able to completely rebuild the park now and also sustain it for many years to come. And we still to this day, every bottle you buy, $5 goes back.
Sounds like a good time with good cause.
Yeah, and also, I mean, it's just a beautiful bourbon. It's 115 proof.
Okay.
But it does not taste like that at all.
Okay.
And it is extremely chocolate forward, which is just wild.
Okay.
And this year's Baumaree tastes like cocoa powder, so it's not sweet chocolate.
Interesting.
It's almost I don't want to use the word bitter, but I mean, it's like dark chocolate that's not sweet.
Yeah.
It's really, really wonderful. Last year's Baumaree, 2020 Baumaree tasted like dark chocolate fudge. And it's, you get the oak in there and
I think it's like, so cool, the fact no matter like, okay, we do 75% corn, 15% this, 11% this, but you have the exact same processes, but yet at the end of the day, I know there's a level of comfort or acceptableness, but like I love how it changes throughout the year. That each year has a different barrel has a different flavor, which is so cool and unique. I love that.
Yeah, it's my favorite part of the industry. Like,
so you have that one. What's another one?
We have that one. So we also have another honey infused bourbon.
Is that a yellow wax, I'd imagine?
Yeah, it's yellow wax. It's called Honeydew. It's spelled like honeydew melon, but it actually has to do with Dan's wife Nancy had been telling Dan we should really do a honey bourbon. I know it'll be great. But Dan, for years, was like, I'm not doing a flavored bourbon. Like, it's not bourbon. I'm not doing it. But then Donis found a way around this whole, like, flavored deal where he dumped out a bunch of barrels that were meant for small batch. And then he cut up the barrels into little chips that are about, like, 1.5 inches big. And then he sent off the chips with a boatload of wildflower honey from Burleson's honey in Waxahachie, Texas.
Okay.
And they pressure infuse these chips with this honey. And then they send it back, and the chips smell amazing. Like, I have a little bag of them at home, and sometimes I just, like, open it up and, like, smell it. It smells so good. And then for 7 months, we steep these chips in the bourbon.
Yum.
So it's a legitimate honey infusion rather than us just throwing honey in there all willy-nilly.
And making a flavored bourbon.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when we were developing this product, I was working in production at that time, and Donis went out and bought the top 10 with honey, whiskeys, and liqueurs. And he had all of us try them and write down what we liked and what we didn't like. And across the board, all of us were like, this is too sweet. I feel sticky from head to toe. My mouth, it feels like...
I didn't brush my teeth. It's very sugary. Very sugary.
And it was... All of us felt horrible the next day.
Yeah.
So we wanted it to be bourbon first. So when you taste our Honeydew, it is absolutely 100% Garrison Brothers bourbon, but then you just get a little kiss of wildflower honey.
It's not overpowering. It's not a flavored thing.
I have some here for you somewhere.
Cool.
I brought some from
HD Honeydew.
Yes. It's from my little special stash.
So we have a little special stash when we sip in here. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the fourth one. And what's...
So we also have our Cowboy Bourbon, which is this one.
And what's that?
So Cowboy is a compilation
What color wax, real quick?
It is gold.
Okay.
It is gold now. If you find an older release of Cowboy, it's black. But in the past couple of years, we've transitioned into gold.
Okay.
It is a marriage of our oldest barrels on the ranch. So here in Texas, due to the heat, we have a 14% evaporation rate a year. So we lose 14% of our product.
Per barrel.
Per barrel.
Wow.
So we're already using smaller barrels. We're using 15 and 30-gallon barrels, which are significantly smaller than your traditional 53-gallon hogshead barrel, as they call them. So by the time that we're ready to, our bourbon matures, is ready to go around 4 years. And by the time we hit that mark, it's half gone. So people ask us all the time, like, why aren't you doing a 10-year-old? Why aren't you doing a 15-year-old? And we're like, boy, do we wish we could.
Yeah,
then I don't have to explain the difference between maturity and age. But
you can apply that to anywhere in life.
Yes, you can.
I'm 40, but I feel like I'm a lot younger. Yeah, I make memes for a living to do a podcast. Yeah, how mature is that? And I'm sipping bourbon at 2:30.
There you go.
On a Thursday.
I mean, it sounds like a great day to me.
It's not bad. I'm not complaining.
But our Cowboy is a marriage of our barrels that are like 6, 7, and 8 years old that are only going to give us like a handful of bottles. They're only going to give us like 4 bottles out of there.
That's it?
That's it.
So wait, you brought some?
I did bring some for you. We release 6,000 bottles a year to the world. This is last year's. It's uncut and unfiltered. So when you buy a bottle of Cowboy, there's a good chance you're going to have some little floaties in there. That's just barrel char. And we also don't proof it down with our rainwater. So we let the bourbon gods decide what the proof is every year.
What's this proof?
So the one that you have was last year. It was 134.
Holy.
0.6. The year before that was 138. The year before that was 136.
Do you enjoy that?
Cowboy is, you can grab a fresh glass from that if you would like.
I'll wash this. I'm a cowboy over here. I don't do that.
The short answer is, so Cowboy is a beautiful bourbon, but I personally can't drink a lot of it at a time.
Well, 130
as
proof.
You should. I mean, well, I'm not going to tell people what they should do. Like, if you buy a bottle of Garrison Brothers, you should drink it a lot and fast.
I'm with you.
So, but Cowboy is one of those bourbons that is really good if you decant it and let it open up. When you do that, oxygen is literally getting into your bourbon and changing the chemistry of what's going in there. So it's causing everything to oxidize a little bit, which is really good. You want that to happen, but you don't want it to over-oxidize. But when you allow it to suit a little bit, a lot of fruity and floral esters will come forward.
It smells good.
Yeah.
It's very it's a strong smell, but it's good.
I mean, the bourbon that's left in these barrels that have been aging for so long, it's like bourbon syrup. It is extremely packed full of sweetness and oak and spicy.
It is very oaky and spicy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. All right.
It is super good, and it has a huge cult following. When we release Cowboy, we do it every September, once a year, and 6,000 bottles is all we have for the world. So we usually will sell 1,000 of them from the ranch right here where we are. And people will line up starting at 8 p.m. the night before that we release it, and we'll have a line going all the way down High Arbor Road until the cops basically are like, what did we tell you last year? Like, you can't be doing this. But people...
We've been drinking Cowboy. We don't know. We forget.
Yeah, but people want it. They line up for it.
Tell me about how because I feel like... I don't know. I'm not a mathematician. So I feel like 7 years ago, bourbon just started kind of picking up. You know what I mean? So tell me about the demand and kind of the following that y'all are seeing over at Garrison Brothers, and I guess how y'all are responding to that.
I mean, we are just extremely lucky here at Garrison. I mean, once we have this saying at the company, we call it liquid to lips. Because it's an expensive bottle. I mean, a bottle of small batch is $85.
It is.
And then it goes up from there. And we fully understand that, but we believe it's worth it.
Well, so people see that. So people see Texas Bourbon, right? And they're seeing this and they're like, man, Garrison Brothers, price point is a little bit too much for all this stuff.
Yeah.
However, there's a lot behind that price.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? First off, the people that are involved have been here for a long time.
Yeah.
You know, there's a history here where you're sourcing your product, and it's a very fine bourbon. So I think it justifies those price points.
Yeah, and once you try it, you get it.
You get it.
Once you come out here, you get it.
Yeah.
But for people, just take that first sip. It's the first step, and we've been incredibly lucky that people try it, and they're like, wow, this is really good. And then you have the rise of Texas Bourbon, I'm part of the Texas Whiskey Association, and
you're a board member on there, correct?
I'm on their compliance board.
Okay,
so
cool.
I'm who you have to talk to when you want to be on
a Texas
to
stamp.
be like have the stamp.
Wow.
I do it with a couple other people, and it is. I mean, the amount of distillery. Once we started the organization, the amount of people that did not make their product before, and were like, "Whoa! Like this group has power." Started making their product now is huge.
Well, that's kind of cool because it kind of improves it actually gives a lot of clout to Texas Bourbon. You know what I mean? So it's like, we pass off this, we slapped a label on this, what we purchased from Ohio, was it? Indiana.
Yeah.
So it kind of brings a certain level of clout, like, it's Kentucky bourbon. This is Texas bourbon. Yeah. So it kind of brings a certain level of, you know what I mean?
And it's so different than Kentucky bourbon. Like, I mean, in one word, Texas bourbon is bold. Like, it is, I find it to be significantly more flavorful than Kentucky bourbon generally is.
Is that because of the process for it to age in Texas because the weather is a lot quicker?
Yep. It's all about the aging process.
I wonder where I learned that.
Yeah. But I mean, and also as someone that lived in Connecticut and then moved down here, I think you can speak to this as well. There is a just an aura about Texas that people are interested in. There's the culture, the attitude, like people
it's
are
a state of mind.
Exactly. And everybody is kind of like, oh, like Texans down there in their little yeehaw bubble, but then they see all these products that are like Texan, and they're like, well, what's going on down there? And especially with the rise of like Tito's, which, I mean,
it's huge now. It's actually, I have a friend in Connecticut who actually has been working for Tito's up in New York, I think.
Yeah. It is, I mean, Tito's has brought all this attention to Texas and their spirits, and then, of course, you have distillers like Garrison Brothers and Balcones and Treaty Oak and Iron Root and, like, Andalusia and all these people that are being written about in all of these magazines and winning all these awards. Like, it's all over the place. Actually, in Forbes recently, they named Texas whiskey as one of the top trends to look for this year.
Really?
Yeah. People are just finding it fascinating. It's something different than what they're used to.
Well, it's kind of, I don't even know if you can do this in the bourbon industry, but, I mean, obviously, in this industry, obviously, time, you can't mess with time. Mm-hmm. Time's there. Time's a constant. Mm-hmm. You really can't age something faster than So with this huge influx of interest and huge people like getting into bourbon, it's become like there's Facebook groups out there. There's there's trades and all that stuff. So getting into something like this, how do you guys plan to, to not, I guess, have a knee-jerk reaction with the demand and to keep the product constant and to the level of standards that Dan Garrison has? I mean, is that something that y'all need to be conscious of, or is it just like, no, this is how we do business here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we will never sacrifice the quality of our product at the end of the day. We have been looking at the trends and have taken the proper routes to prepare for the rise of Garrison Brothers and Texas Bourbon ultimately by quadrupling production in 2018. So all of that bourbon that we started making then is going to be ready starting next year and the year after. And we started filling 53-gallon barrels to kind of see what happens then and how that's going to affect the aging process. Because when you have that smaller barrel, it's not a different process, but you're getting different flavors pulled out of it. When you have the larger barrel, I mean, everything just changes. So
you know what's cool about this, everyone? So we were talking, and we saw the butcher drive by with some 53-gallon barrels and all that stuff. And, Emma started saying, she's like, we're trying this out. We're trying this out. And I was, I was like, aren't you guys nervous about that? Like, you're trying this new process, new size barrel, and you were like, well, we're actually kind of mixing the two. Like, but we are trying this out. This much % of the bourbon is going to this. And you're like, we're going to try it out. We're just going to see what happens.
We're going to figure it out. At the end of the day, 53-gallon barrels are going to give you more product. So it may be a longer aging process, but it's a shift that we kind of had we had to make. So we're seeing how it goes, and we're hoping it's going to work out.
Are you seeing? That's the only thing candy right. Time will tell. Are you seeing? And I'm trying the Honeydew right now. And I hope you don't mind me going through your personal
No, I brought this for you guys. So the B is obviously Baumaree. Then we have our Honeydew, our Cowboy, and then I actually brought you a sample of our high rye bourbon as well, which we only released. We only had 12 barrels of it. We released it last year, and you can't get it anymore. So
you're hearing that around the Rotary and the Garrison Brothers with Emma Kahn. So I guess with what trends are you seeing out there in the industry right now when it comes to the bourbon? Because obviously it's just picking up. I mean, is that rise still there?
Absolutely.
That's steep?
Yeah, I read a fascinating book recently called Pappyland, and it was written by a writer from ESPN. So it has a little bit of a different view than writer? His name is Wright something, right?
I don't know. I wouldn't know.
I feel awful. But
well, he's not a listener, so it's okay.
You never know. You never know.
We'll probably listen to this, actually.
Yeah. But he was writing about basically the rise of the brand Pappy Van Winkle, and he wrote about the Van Winkle family and how, this poor family, was just like kicked to the curb with Stitzel-Weller and not being able to sell a drop, and then they had to sell it, and then basically they were bought by Stitzel-Weller, they were bought by another company, and then they were ultimately bought by Diageo, and Diageo took all of these Pappy barrels and threw them into Crown Royal.
Okay.
Which is like, obviously it's Canadian whiskey.
Yeah.
And then in the early 2000s, and then we move into like this day and age where Pappy is the most sought after bourbon in the world. You can't find it anywhere. It's extremely expensive. Because all these barrels were gone.
So it's a question of supply and demand. And also, it's good. I think it's good.
Buffalo Trace is currently making more Pappy because and supposedly, according to this book, Julian Van Winkle is pretty happy with what they're doing. I mean, with I feel like Pappy is a really wonderful example of people's interest in bourbon because it went from nothing to this, like, they won a huge award, and all of a sudden it was like, oh my goodness, like, where can I get this? And then you have all these other bourbons coming out that have a similar model, where not necessarily with Pappy, which I used to say all the time that Pappy's the most brilliant marketing scheme in the world, but until I read this book, that's like, oh, like, there's literally, like, none of this. Like they're not just, like, purposely releasing a little bit at a time.
There's just none.
Like, and that, it may be the story going forward.
Pappyland?
Yeah, that was the book.
Okay.
But you have all these other bourbons that are coming out, and from all these huge distilleries that have special releases and that people want to covet and collect, and just know more about this little piece of Americana, of American history. And it is just wild. And as I told you earlier, it's like, this isn't your grandfather's bourbon anymore. Like, this is not just like what they used to drink. It's a passion. It's a lifestyle. Like, and it is blowing up. And with the rise of the craft industry as well, people want to go local.
I was going to say, I bet that would make your job a little more harder, because it's not like the people that like bourbon are like casual, like, oh yeah, I'll take whatever, just like vodka, like, this, I'll just take this. It seems like the people that this is a hobby, this is a passion. So I would assume that your job has probably gotten a lot more intricate.
Yes.
Because you do have to know certain things. And actually, going back to Pat, there is a distillery, the Copper.
Yeah.
There's something here that has a little history from Kentucky, correct?
Yeah, so our first still, who we call the Copper Cowgirl.
Yep.
Dan actually bought her from Elmer T. Lee. And the Copper, it was Mr. Lee's test still. And he developed many of the beautiful bourbons that Buffalo Trace makes, including Blanton's, on that still. So we're super lucky to have her. All of our stills are direct replicas of the Copper Cowgirl.
Different sizes, though.
Much larger scale.
What's your feel on the whole Blanton's?
I like Blanton's. It's also a wheated bourbon, which I have that weird gene where rye tastes like dill.
By the way, this Honeydew is extremely good. It's like a refreshing bourbon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So a lot of rye, which unfortunately rye is the traditional grain to use in bourbon. Like with bourbon, unless you find a 4-grain bourbon, which has become very popular, you're always going to have corn because it's federally mandated. You're always going to have barley. For the most part, you're going to see people using barley because barley will convert starch into sugar, which you need for fermentation. And then people will pick a third flavoring grain, and they're either going to pick rye or they're going to pick wheat. It wasn't until the rise of like Pappy Van Winkle and Weller and Maker's Mark. With Maker's Mark, you see the rise of the wheated bourbon.
Okay.
So
you don't think it's like this whole Vouv? Like, I feel like I always say Blanton's with dudes is like Vouv with like like brunchers. You know what I mean? It's like, do you like Blanton's? Or are you just getting it because it's like the cool thing to do? Because it's like Blanton's. Like, you know what I mean?
I feel like there's a little bit of both.
Do you feel like it's that good, or it's like, man, there's a lot of other stuff on that level?
Steal Dan's bottle.
I do see it right.
You see it?
I do see it right there. Yeah, I would love to steal from Dan Garrison at Garrison Brothers property after doing a tour and meeting other amazing folks here.
Yeah,
I just want to steal something.
I mean, Blanton's is super good. I like it. I personally like it a lot, and I mean, I love this industry for the culture and the history, and like, I'm a total nerd and love like the science. And as much as I loved making the product, and I loved having my hands on everything, like what I do now as a bourbon educator is just super fun. And the culture surrounding stuff like Blanton's is just wild. I mean, you have all these people looking for these little caps so they can have like the whole like
spell Blanton's.
deal. And
it's a niche.
Yeah.
So if I'm a novice, I am a novice bourbon drinker. I love bourbon. I love how kind of this podcast kind of has turned into this, which kind of led me reaching out to y'all, and y'all graciously accepted to actually host us and have us on. Thank you. If I'm a novice bourbon drinker and I don't really know it, but I want to get into it, what kind of steps would you kind of advise people out there to kind of look out for? Like, how would one get into this hobby?
Honestly, I mean, buying bottles can be extremely expensive. Once I started really getting into the bourbon industry, with my first job in Dallas, there was an Irish pub around the corner from me that had this amazing whiskey selection. They were called Trinity Hall.
Okay.
And I would go in there all the time, and I would just buy pours so I could try things. And eventually, they just started giving me, fun stuff just to try because I'd been in there so much. But it's a little more, so a pour of Garrison Brothers is usually anywhere between $12 and $18 for when you go out to get small batch. That's a little more manageable than just diving down the rabbit hole to $85, something that you're not sure that you're going to buy. Yeah. So when you go to all these whiskey bars are popping up all over the country, and they're hugely popular. So just going into your local whiskey bar and just being hey, I want to try a wheated bourbon today, or I want to try something from Texas. I want to try something out of Colorado or from the Northeast.
So pretty much it's okay to walk in someplace, say, hey, look, I really kind of don't know what I'm talking about, but I enjoy it. I don't know what I enjoy about it. You guide me.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how we're going to find kind of what works with you, what doesn't work with you, and that's kind of when you kind of, I guess, maybe might go down that path.
Yeah, and then once you start to find things that you really like, then you can start going down the, okay, I'm ready to buy a bottle of this, I'm ready to buy a bottle of that, and you can learn, I really love bourbons maybe with a high rye content, or I'm really loving bourbons that are coming out of, the mountains of Colorado, and then you can start to dive a little deeper. So especially for, Texas bourbon, I mean, there's so much to try. So once you start to figure out, oh, man, I'm really into this whole Texas bourbon craze, then you can dig a little deeper and start trying everything else. And I mean, for us in particular, we have just an entire lineup of different expressions that we've done, different finishes, different ways that we've innovated this time tradition of bourbon. And it just keeps going.
And so y'all have done a tremendous job. I highly recommend everyone check out Garrison Brothers Distillery on Instagram. They do y'all pair up with a lot of different companies, whether it's ice cream, local companies too, to kind of promote their brand and y'all's too, which I think is phenomenal. You just did one with an ice cream company.
McConnell's.
Yeah,
out of California.
Exactly.
Oh, it was so good. It was a pecan praline bourbon.
Oh my god.
Ice cream.
So phenomenal.
Yeah, it was amazing, and it was written up in the New York Times and all this stuff, and McConnell's was not expecting how popular it was going to be, and they did one batch and they released it and it sold out, and before they could really do any marketing for it.
It just picked up and gone. You know what's interesting too? It's so my wife and I we'll come here a lot with a couple of customers, but to Fredericksburg, and you notice that it's behind Napa Valley. It's the second most whatever winery.
I call this area Texas Napa.
Me too.
Yeah.
So you got not only you have the wineries here, but you also have a huge bourbon presence here now. The Garrison Brothers, it's not one of those things oh yeah, it's a Texas bourbon. It's a serious contender right now because y'all have won a lot of awards in the past for y'all's bourbon. So I guess what would be the next trend for people to look out to? What are you seeing out there that people that bourbon lovers should kind of be looking out for?
Yeah.
And first off, real quick, that Honeydew was phenomenal. That Cowboy one was that's one of those things that you do open it up and kind of pour a little bit and enjoy.
Yeah.
Not too much because,
it'll knock you on your ass.
So. You don't understand all right. And you can say ass, you can say shit, you can say whatever you want.
Great.
No one listens. So what's this HR?
So that was our high rye bourbon. That was a very special release that we did last November.
And you can find all these in stores, correct?
You cannot find the high rye.
Oh, this is exclusive.
Yeah.
Okay.
The rest of them you can find. But the high rye was an experiment that Adonis did years ago to try to develop a rye bourbon.
I love the old just experiment.
So it was 53% corn, 36 wheat, and then 11 barley.
Okay.
So we just wanted to see what would happen. However, whoa.
I like it. It's actually good.
Yeah, it's super good. We didn't make a lot of it though, because Donis is he's very superstitious. You will never find a barrel 666 out there. Thank you. You'll never find bottle 666 because he skips it.
I dig it.
Yeah, he'll skip it. There was one time one of our production operators who was new, he accidentally cooked like 666. He didn't skip it, and Donis made us go back into our computer system and change it.
Well, first off, for those out, why would you even make it a 666 batch? I mean, have you never seen The Omen? Do you understand what's going to happen? You know what I mean? You're going to get the Hounds from Hell. You're going to get Damien. Like, you don't want to get the Omen.
You don't want to mess with it.
You don't want to mess with the mark of the beast.
Yeah. So Donis has his
this is good though.
However, everything broke when we made it.
You taste a little corn. A lot of corn too. I like this.
Corn. Rye is it's a very young grain, and it's very temperamental to work with. When you're cooking, you need anti-foaming agents because it will foam over, and it is just distilling can be difficult with it sometimes. So we were only managed to produce 12 barrels in that run.
And I just tried one?
And you just tried one.
Well, thank you. Mm-hmm. So real quick, going back to what trends are you seeing right now? What's on the horizon for Texas bourbon that you're kind of seeing? Because it sounds to me like you're on the forefront. You're part of all these groups. You're actually y'all give the stamp of approval pretty much for Texas bourbon. So what are you kind of seeing trends out there for bourbon enthusiasts, bourbon lovers? What should they be looking out for?
I think we're going to be seeing many more finished bourbons.
What do you mean?
So using a secondary barrel to add some kind of overlay to it. So we're about to release a port finished bourbon, which is super exciting. We're going to release it this summer. It was aged 3 years in our white oak barrels, and then it was finished for just over about a year and a half in port wine barrels from Spain, which is going to be great.
When is that happening?
This summer.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So in a couple months.
Yeah, around the corner.
And so this is, I'm trying your favorite now.
That's the Baumaree. That's our double barrel bourbon. We've also done a French oak finished bourbon. It was aged for 4 years in white oak, and then an additional 4 years in French oak, French oak barrels, we got them from the Limousin forest of France, which is predominantly used for aging. The wood is predominantly used for aging cognac and Armagnac, and it's prized for the fact that it contains a super high vanillin content. So
that sounds so good.
It is really good.
And what is that called?
It's called Laguna Madre. So it is.
Can you find that?
Not at the moment.
Okay.
We released it last year. We did a huge fundraising effort for COVID relief. We called it Crush COVID-19. And we did all these different donation packages that people could do, and we donated to Team Rubicon, and also we gave money back to bartenders that were in service industry people that were out of work.
Decimated.
Yeah. So we give a lot of money back to that. But if you donated $1,000, you got a bottle of Laguna Madre, a bottle of Honeydew, a boot flask bottle of small batch, which is like a pint, and then a piece of swag from our gift shop that you could choose. So that was the only way that people have gotten Laguna Madre so far. But we're going to release it to market this year.
But that creates a lot of gossip, though. Another cool part about this, y'all have a wall of badass.
Mm-hmm. Our wall of American badass.
So Garrison Brothers, not only is it very philanthropic, and they support the communities around here, and as you said, bartending and all that stuff. But you also very heavily support veterans as well too. I mean, so in the fermentation room. Mm-hmm. I know. In the fermentation room, there's a wall of badass, and there's a sign above there, and I'll post the picture too on Instagram. And it's pretty much every branch that's in. The patches come from where?
We have people from all branches of the military, first responders, police and fire, EMS. They'll send us patches from all over the country.
And the employees here are veterans, right?
A lot of our employees are veterans as well. We are huge supporters of the men and women that have devoted their lives to keeping this country safe. And if us simply putting one of their patches on the wall to be forever remembered is something that is going to make people smile and just bring attention to it, then we are absolutely going to continue doing it.
Well, plus if you slap a badass name to it, like the wall of badass, I think people respect that a little bit more too.
We have some. I encourage people to come out to Garrison and just look at it. We have some really amazing patches from every branch of the military all over the world, like they're fun.
I'll tell you what, send your patches here if you serve. Send them here and maybe we'll hang them up.
Yeah, no, seriously, if you mail your patches to the Garrison Brothers distillery, we will put them up for sure.
Ooh.
But
so I am trying your favorite.
The Baumaree.
Yes, and I can see this is very good. And I wish it was like a sommelier where I taste notes of this, but it is a sweeter side to it. But it's I feel like you're waiting on me to say.
No, it's okay.
I can't describe it. It's good. It's a lighter finish, but it's also strong.
Yeah.
Yeah, it also hits. I like that.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful bourbon. I love it so much.
So you think the next step, the next trend in the bourbon industry would be the
different finishes, and also one trend that I'm particularly fascinated with is a lot of distilleries are starting to use different types of grains. So Iron Root Republic Distilling, which is up in Denison, Texas, which is about an hour north of Dallas, they use all these different corn varietals in their bourbon, and they
so they're mixing white corn with other
white corn, purple corn, hamachi, like all this super fun stuff. And so I am the Texas ambassador for Bourbon Women, which is obviously a female-run organization for women, not only in the industry but just women that are passionate about bourbon.
So what is it called again?
So the organization is called Bourbon Women.
Bourbon Women.
And one of our original members and kind of founders of this Texas branch is Marsha Licorice, who is the matriarch of Iron Root. Yes.
I love that.
Matriarch of Iron Root. And it's her and her two sons that run this distillery, and they are doing just wild innovation. And I was in Dallas a couple weeks ago before Snowmageddon, and I called Marsha and I'm like, please let me on the property. Like, please, like, let me come play for a day. And she was like, of course, like, come on out. So I got to spend the day with them, and they let me just, like, I told Robert, one of her sons, I'm like, I'm really interested in all these, like, corn differences.
So they're just using various type, like, just like random corns and all to try new things.
Yeah, he let me try a couple single barrels. Each barrel was made with a different 100%. It was 100% corn whiskey, and each barrel was a different varietal of corn. And it blew my mind. It was so different. Like, each one was so different. And a lot of people are doing this with bourbon and corn whiskey and all that good stuff, but you're seeing it a lot in the rye industry as well.
Okay.
There are a couple of distilleries that are coming out of like way up north where rye grows. That like they're making all this phenomenal rye whiskey. It's like each one is different.
I feel like Garrison Brothers it's a staple, right? I mean, it's definitely one of the first. It is the first Texas bourbon distillery since Prohibition. I feel like it's a staple. So with all these other Texas bourbons popping up and all that stuff, I mean, is this one of those things where it's like, hey, like, is it like podcasts? You're like, hey, I don't give a shit how many podcasts out there. I love it all. You know what I mean? Or is it one of those things like, we got to watch out for this, people. We need to actually start, marketing this way? Or, I mean, does it excite you, or is it kind of like, okay, well, let's focus again on this marketing? I mean, what does it do for you seeing all this, like, this surge of distilleries?
I think it's a little of both. I mean, luckily, Garrison Brothers is a super premium bourbon.
Oh yeah.
And there isn't that much that is kind of, they're starting to kind of come up, but a lot of it just isn't there yet.
Yeah.
And we do have the appeal of us being the first and using all the grain that we use. Our barrels are custom made for us and all this good stuff. So that is a lot of it, and we're doing a huge push for like Texas bourbon made by Texans.
But that's kind of what you're promoting. I mean, that's kind of the board you're on, and you're making sure that if you're going to say Texas bourbon, it better be Texas here. Bourbon.
Exactly. Personally, I find everything just super exciting. The bourbon industry, especially in Texas, like, everybody just wants to help each other, because at the end of the day, if Iron Root is making something with purple corn and they're like killing it, and then it's like, whoa, we have to step our game up if we want to. Yeah. Like, it's a friendly competition. Yeah. It's not like a, oh shit kind of moment. It's like okay, like, what are we going to do next to kind of to continue that innovation?
You know what's cool about this too? It seems like the Texas bourbon scene is relatively young.
Extremely.
Right? It's extremely young. So you're going to see a lot of innovation. You're going to see a lot of new things. You're going to see a lot of you're going to see a lot of, evolution, if you want to call
Absolutely.
it. I mean, I'm excited for that. I really am.
Yeah.
I'm excited. I mean, every time someone brings a bottle of Garrison Brothers, I'm going to get pumped. And actually, that's how this started. I mean, y'all are very engaging, too. So I used to tag Garrison Brothers in a lot of posts. And next thing you know, someone's chiming back at me like, hey, thanks for the post. Like, enjoy and all that stuff. That's kind of how this podcast came to be. It's like, well, my wife and I are going to be up in Fredericksburg, so let's do this. And here comes your mom right now.
Hi, Mom. Hello. My mother works here, too. It's
Her mother works
fun.
here, too. So it is a family thing.
Yes. She's eating lunch.
Make sure you pair that with a nice Honeydew bourbon.
If they would let me, I would.
We'll talk to them. So, is there anything you'd like to else? I know we're coming up on an hour 24 minutes. I'm serious. I could probably sit here another 2 hours and talk to you. What else can we you want to bring up or discuss, or kind of a message you want to get out there to the bourbon community, or actually people maybe chiming in that aren't even in the bourbon community that just want to listen to this? I mean,
yeah. I mean, obviously, just preaching just Texas bourbon is here to stay, and please give it a chance because it is truly different. It is one of the most unique pockets in the bourbon industry that's been around for hundreds of years. And we're finally innovating. And Garrison Brothers has just been leading this charge full force and very proudly in cowboy boots and a cowboy hat, saying that we are Texas and we are here to stay. I mean, our people. I'm trying to coin this new idea.
Are we starting a trend right now?
Yes, I'm going to tell you one of my trends.
Let's start.
Besides, for number one, there's a difference between maturity and aging, which we've talked about. But number two, it's this idea I'm trying to get across to people that's called social terroir. Terroir is a French word that when you boil down, it's very popular in wine.
Of
course, yeah. Ultimately, when it's a very complex word that's hard to describe in English, but ultimately it means environment. It's how your environment plays into your product. So social terroir is the idea. You got to pull it the other way. Yeah.
First off, don't ever correct me on my podcast. No, go on.
Social terroir.
So pretty much what I'm doing right now, I'm trying to open this single barrel to try this before we conclude. So social terroir. Social
terroir is the idea of why do your grandmother's cookies taste so much better than everybody else's, despite them being the same recipe on the back of the Toll House bag that everybody has access to.
Yeah.
It's because she made them. It's because it was the person that made it. And as you've noticed, the people that work here are...
I'm going to talk about that.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk about that.
They're just phenomenal people that have poured blood, sweat, and tears into this bourbon and truly live Garrison Brothers bourbon. And you can taste it. You can taste the passion in there.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. So my wife and I came out. This is the first distillery I've ever been to, okay? But walking around here, first off, your dog comes running up, and you're like... Some lady comes up, she's like, hey, what's going on? And you're like, oh, this is my mom, by the way. I mean, there's such a sense of first off, it's very down to earth, but it's also, you see a lot of people that are very passionate about what they do. Mm-hmm. And you also see a lot of people that, okay, well, he used to do this 3 years ago. Now he's doing this now he's going to do this. There's a lot of movement so people understand from the ground up. You know what I mean? So the community is definitely here, and it seems like such a great... I mean, I was talking to you, I'm like, you live in Austin, and Emma came up, and I said, thanks for taking the time to do this. Are we rushing your schedule? And her response is, no, the fact I get to get up here and hang out at the ranch and see my friends and all this stuff, that's what it's all about. And I appreciate how serious y'all take the process and take bourbon, take your quality control, and just kind of what y'all do to the community. So y'all have a great team up here, and you really can. It's not one of those things where it's like, oh, Texas bourbon, slap something on it. What you're doing for the Texas bourbon scene, the Texas spirit scene, whether it's Texas wine, all that stuff, I think is awesome. I mean, you're actually making standards where this label means something. Mm-hmm. It means something we made in Texas, and I think what you're doing right now, coming from Connecticut, Yankee, I think it's awesome. I really do. And I appreciate, first off, I appreciate the hospitality here. And I think if anyone's in the area, and if anyone wants to get out of wherever your city you're in, whether it's Midland, Dallas, Houston, wherever you're listening from, and actually come visit, I highly recommend this place because it's laid back, people are great, bourbon's phenomenal, and just learn about the process.
Yeah, we're doing tours again. We're open. Come see us. We're doing tours Thursday, Friday, and Saturday at the moment.
And come support too. I mean, I'm sure COVID kind of dropped some visitors numbers off, but I mean, at the same time, come support.
Yeah, and it's also wildflower season's right around the corner. So come out and see some wildflowers with us. You can hang out in our hospitality area and have some bourbon and look at some bluebonnets.
Take a tour first so you understand what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Emma, is there anything else I can touch on right now, or is there anything else we discussed or anything like that?
I think I'm good. Do you have any final questions?
I'm sure I do, but I don't know. But Emma, I thank everyone. This is Emma Kahn, the Bourbon Crusader, who's on just promoting, speaking about Texas bourbons and what it's like to be in Texas. And again, she's over at Garrison Brothers. I'm sure we all know that by now. But again, what you're doing right now for the industry and what you're doing for Texas, I love it. I love the passion y'all have here out at the ranch. And thank you for taking the time and just bullshitting with us and actually having the same conversation twice, because we had the same conversation before.
It's
when we were doing
my
the tour.
pleasure. Not a problem.
I really enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed sitting here drinking bourbon and listening. And again, I could probably talk for another 2 hours, but I know I won't, because we know Monica's out there waiting for me. And plus, I don't get too
toasty.
Exactly, but I will. But thank you again so much, and thank you for the time, and just appreciate it.
Of course.
All right, everyone out there. Again, this is Emma Kahn. If you at Garrison Brothers Distillery, follow them on Instagram. Where else can they find Garrison Brothers? I mean, you can find Total Wine,
yeah.
Specs.
Oh yeah. You can find pretty much any of your big box stores,
any
and of course support your, especially in Texas. Like, we're at most independent liquor stores at this point too, so you can go support your little mom and pops. And
you know what? I challenge anyone out there who is a bourbon drinker. If you go out to a restaurant and next time you get a bourbon, whether it's on the rocks, meat, whatever, try Garrison Brothers.
Mm-hmm.
Just try it, or it for a customer, and then you try a little bit of theirs. But I guarantee you, it packs a punch, and it's delicious, and it has more of a complex, bold flavor, I feel like, than it does Kentucky bourbon.
Absolutely.
But that just may be me after 7 bourbons, but that's not the point. So, Emma, thank you again for joining us on Around the Rotary, and I look forward to staying in touch. And thank you, everyone out there listening. And we'll link Garrison Brothers and all that once we post this. All right, y'all, take it easy, and thank you for listening to Around the Rotary with J.P. Warren.